If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. "We'll go in from the outside, since you can't enter the girls' dormitory," said Wednesday, and that's exactly what they did. Luke picked her up in his arms and flew, then used shambles to teleport inside, since the balcony door was locked from the inside. "I could easily be a thief," thought Luke, as Wednesday released her hold around his neck. The room greeted him with immediate visual whiplash. One half was exactly what you'd expect from Wednesday. Black curtains, Gothic furniture, a bed with dark velvet sheets, and a disturbing collection of antique jars on a shelf that probably held things no one should ask about. The other half was far too colorful. Pink cat print bedspreads, dim lights shaped like stars and hearts, plush pillows, and a mirror covered in stickers. There was even an aroma diffuser filling the room with a soft vanilla and raspberry scent. Luke raised an eyebrow. "So you do share a room with Enid. The pop music during the video calls was hers." Wednesday didn't deny it. Instead, she made a sarcastic remark. "Your deduction skills are blinding, Sherlock." This girl, thought Luke, somewhere between resigned and amused. Wednesday walked over to her side of the room, sat down on her bed with the black sheets, and patted the spot next to her twice, looking him in the eyes. "Sit." Luke watched her for another second. Months ago, she had sent Enid to Sunnyvale knowing she might die. She'd seen a vision of her death, and she sent her anyway, out of jealousy, out of love for him. Then she ended up saving her, and now they shared a room and missions in the war against the Spellmans. Luke walked over slowly, saying nothing, and sat beside her. The mattress creaked slightly. He didn't overthink the meaning behind that. "We need to talk." Wednesday wasn't the kind of person to express emotions just because. But after so many months apart, after weeks of video calls and fighting separate battles, she just missed him. She thought about him many times a day, and now she wanted to let it out her own way, or at least that's what Luke assumed. With a crooked smile, Luke slid his arm around Wednesday's waist, pulling her firmly toward him, and gave her a soft, confident kiss on the lips. She didn't pull away. "I never thought Wednesday Addams couldn't control her impulses," Luke murmured teasingly, barely breaking the kiss. "Was the abstinence that rough?" Wednesday looked at him. She didn't react. She didn't blush. She didn't return the kiss. She simply observed him with her usual neutral, almost analytical expression. "I don't want to have sex, Luke," said Wednesday with total calm, like someone reading a technical report. "Not right now, and that's not why I had you come all the way here." Luke blinked once, processing the unexpected turn. "Oh, you don't?" he asked, letting go of her waist in response to her serious tone, still looking at her with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Then, what do you want to talk about?" Wednesday looked at him for a second longer. "Enid." "Enid," Luke repeated after a moment. He raised an eyebrow slightly as he looked at her, as if trying to read deeper into her eyes. Before Wednesday could open her mouth, Luke continued. "Did you two become friends?" he asked. "Why do you think that?" asked Wednesday, tilting her head. "I saw you two pretty close just minutes ago, and you seem to work well together in battle. You took down Gabriel Spellman together. Wouldn't be crazy if now you share a room and go on missions because you see her as reliable, strong, and with good synergy. And considering you spent months together doing dangerous missions, it wouldn't be that crazy if you were best friends now," Luke explained. Wednesday blinked once. She wasn't annoyed, just analytical. "Best friends," she repeated, as if testing the concept. "Knowing me, do you really think I'd have a best friend? I never had friends, just you and my family. You told me that during the first months at Nevermore, you and Enid had some sort of connection. It wouldn't be strange to think that now, after everything that's happened, you've reconnected. She managed to connect with you when no one else could, even when I wasn't around. That means something," Luke said. Wednesday held his gaze for several seconds. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes," she said finally. "We became friends, Calling her my best friend sounds disproportionate, but she's the only friend I have. If you want to talk about how you're friends now and think it'll bother me because she's my ex-girlfriend, don't worry, said Luke in a calm, genuine tone. It doesn't bother me. Wednesday didn't stop him. If you can be her friend and she can be yours, Luke continued. After you tried to send her to her death, he added bluntly, not softening the fact. I can handle it. There was no judgment in his voice, just a kind of dry, practical acceptance. And if that means you have a friend, that makes me happy too, Luke concluded, placing his hand over Wednesday's pale one. A brief silence followed. Wednesday looked at him closely, with a warmth rare in her, but entirely real. She knew Luke wasn't the best at expressing what he felt, and yet there he was, saying all of that, in his own way, and she appreciated him for it. Too bad, he was completely wrong about what this conversation was actually about. Thanks, she said calmly, but that's not what I came to tell you. Luke looked at her, confused. Then what do you want to talk about that has to do with Enid? Wednesday didn't look away. Her eyes, dark and precise, stayed locked on his. As you know, Enid is still in love with you, she began bluntly. Obsessed might also be an accurate word. Luke didn't say anything. He simply kept his gaze fixed on her, letting her continue. She went to Sunnyvale because I told her you'd need help. She risked her life without hesitation. She missed school for months without telling her family anything, and she helped us fight the Spellmans with everything she had. Wednesday lowered her gaze slightly, as if replaying scenes in her mind. I ended up saving her, and it wasn't out of guilt. It was because I saw how far she was willing to go for you. Besides, honestly, if I had been alone against Gabriel Spellman, I wouldn't have made it out alive. Same as you against Elliot, but I doubt I would have awakened a green aura, so I would have died. Luke gave a brief nod. He remembered perfectly the looks, the gestures, the silences from Enid when they found each other in the woods, searching for the tree where her parents had hidden the evidence. He knew her too well not to see it. It was obvious. She was still in love, and if she wasn't, why else would she have gone there? Wednesday continued, and now, after all that, I became her friend. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but it happened and she's still helping in the war. Completely devoted to you. Sure, she has strong morals and would side with the council, but she wouldn't have gotten this involved as just a student. But for you, she's doing more than she should as a minor, risking her life, being completely loyal. There was a silence. Then Wednesday added calmly, but what happens when the war is over? Luke didn't respond. She's in love with you, and even if she's my friend now, it would hurt her to keep seeing me, seeing us. She'll most likely walk away, and I don't want that to happen. Luke looked at her. You don't want to lose her. Wednesday nodded, just once. I came to a logical conclusion, and an emotional one, although I dislike admitting it, she said. I want the three of us to be together, in a polyamorous relationship, you, Enid, and me. The room grew even quieter, as if even the air had stopped moving. Luke didn't move. He didn't react. He just looked at her as if time itself had paused between them. Wednesday, with her icy gaze and surgical words, had just opened the door to something not even Luke, with all his foresight, had dared to predict. He kept staring at her in silence, as if trying to figure out whether she was joking, testing him, casting an illusion, or if he'd simply misheard. Several seconds passed. Wednesday remained still, her posture perfectly upright, waiting. Luke, she asked, breaking the prolonged silence. Luke blinked, breathed, reacted as if waking from a trance. I think I misheard. Could you say that again? Wednesday didn't blink. You didn't mishear. I want a polyamorous relationship. The three of us, with you at the center. Enid and I are both in love with you. Luke parted his lips, but no sound came out. He closed them again, lowering his gaze for a moment, as if trying to reorganize the world in his head. Wednesday continued with absolute calm. I want to know what you think. Luke slowly lifted his gaze but didn't speak. He was still processing. Wednesday noticed. She didn't push, Take your time, she said neutrally, turning toward her nightstand. With grace, she picked up a small, dark book, its spine worn from use. She crossed her legs again, her posture flawless, effortlessly elegant, and opened it calmly. Hey, you can't just sit there and start reading after dropping something like that, said Luke, reaching out and gently taking the book from her hands. She didn't resist. She just looked at him with that glacial calm that was often more unsettling than an open threat. But she said nothing. You were seriously just going to start reading like nothing happened? Luke asked, a mix of disbelief and sarcasm in his tone. It was simply a courtesy. In case you needed time to think, Wednesday replied, as if nothing were out of the ordinary. Luke narrowed his eyes. Is this some kind of test? Like, if I hesitate for 1 second, if I don't say yes immediately, are you going to crucify me or something? 2. Wednesday tilted her head, looking at him with that serene expression. You think I would joke about sharing you? You. As she spoke, she raised her hand and gently placed her palm on Luke's cheek. Her touch was cold, delicate, but her gaze. Those eyes were like a bottomless well, dark, unblinking, obsessive devotion, a stare that would freeze anyone else's blood. Luke swallowed hard. You're right, you wouldn't joke about this. Wednesday lowered her hand. But it's still hard to believe that you would suggest a polyamorous relationship, said Luke. He remembered Edgar telling him to choose both, that polygamy was an option, and how he had dismissed it at the time. How would the old man react now? He'd probably laugh at Luke's stunned reaction. Wednesday nodded slowly and stood up, taking a few steps toward the window before turning back to face him. I understand your confusion. It's not an idea normally associated with me, but this war changed a lot of things, including my perspective. Her voice was steady. It's not just that I don't want to lose Enid. She's the only friend I have, literally. And when this war ends, if you and I are still together, Enid won't want to keep seeing me. She'll see me as an obstacle, a constant reminder, and that will destroy her. Luke watched her in silence. But it's not just that, Wednesday continued. Werewolves have emotionally intense cultures. Their relationships aren't casual, Luke. You're talking about the mate thing, Luke asked, and she nodded. The destined bond. It's not always with their first love, not always with someone they grew up with. But when a werewolf truly falls in love with instinct, body, and soul, that person becomes their mate. Their bond is formed beyond logic. Luke narrowed his eyes. He remembered reading something about that, and he had also felt it, in a way, in Enid's gaze. And that bond doesn't fade with time, or rejection, or distance, said Wednesday. Enid marked you as her mate, even though you two broke up. That's why she protects you like that. Fights like that, gives everything. It's not just love, it's connection. Even though she reacted with pain and even a bit of aggression when you chose me, she eventually realized she couldn't stop thinking about you and couldn't move on the way you did. Luke took a deep breath. Wednesday took another step toward him. And that bond, if it's completely cut, if she can't be with you or near me, it's not going to break us. It's going to break her. Luke said nothing, but something in his face tightened. How will she survive knowing that the person she chose as her soulmate didn't choose her back? How long can emotional someone like Enid live with that emptiness? And more importantly, how could I let that happen to someone I now consider a friend? Wednesday stopped. She looked at him. That's why I'm proposing this. Not as a whim, not as a provocation, but as a solution. I've thought it through and I can accept it. If it's Enid, I don't mind sharing you. She's just like me when it comes to her obsession with you. What am I, a piece of cake? Thought Luke with a slight frown. So, what do you think? Asked Wednesday. For the first time that night, in her eyes, there was something beyond logic. There was vulnerability. Okay, let me get this straight, said Luke, bringing his hands to the bridge of his nose. Have you already talked to Enid about this? Wednesday nodded without hesitation. Yes, she agreed. She doesn't mind sharing you with me. Luke raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk on his face. And what if you and Enid, also have something, some secret attraction, A little battlefield romance blooming between you two. He didn't finish the sentence before, talk. Wednesday flicked him hard on the forehead with 2 fingers. Stop joking, said Wednesday, flatly but without anger. This is a serious moment. Sarcasm doesn't help. Then she added, more calmly, and you know perfectly well that's not the case. You're the center of this. I don't like her and she doesn't like me. Just you. We're friends, nothing more. Luke rubbed his forehead with a small smile, more out of habit than pain. All right, I was just kidding. Don't get mad. He knew Wednesday wasn't into women. She didn't feel attraction to them. Back in Shadowside, when Luke drank the gender-swapping potion and turned into Tuesday, his female version, with features so striking they even made Natasha visibly nervous, Wednesday hadn't reacted at all. And Tuesday was, literally, Luke, just in a woman's body. If Wednesday had felt even a spark of attraction toward women, something would have happened, especially considering she was in love with him, obsessed with him. What would be the difference between his male and female version? There would have been at least a spark, a kiss, a moment of hesitation, but no. Wednesday hadn't kissed him even once while he was in that form. She hadn't even held his hand. In fact, whenever Luke forgot he was transformed and tried to get close as usual, a caress, an automatic hug, a kiss, Wednesday would push him away with an annoyed expression and remind him that he was in his female form and not to touch her. So yes, he had only been joking before. So, what do you say? Asked Wednesday, standing in front of him, hands clasped behind her back, eyes locked on his. So, what do you say? Wednesday asked. Luke stood up. He didn't answer right away. He began to pace slowly back and forth across the room, arms crossed and eyes fixed on the floor, like he was putting together a mental puzzle with no clear corners. I'm in love with you, he said at last, bluntly, turning to face her. Wednesday didn't blink, but her lips moved slightly as she replied, and yet you told me you feel something special for Enid. Not love, but a bond. Luke stopped and nodded. I don't deny it. I still feel that affection for her. Not romantic, but it's there. That's why in Sunnyvale, when she asked me not to kill those vampires, I didn't. And when I died for those few seconds in the fight with Elliot, when I thought everything was ending, she came to my mind too. Not as a lost love, but as someone important. Someone who was once a part of me. Wednesday watched him, saying nothing, just listening, analyzing. Luke ran a hand through his hair. But I'm not in love with her anymore, he finally said, firmly. That part is over. I don't feel that way anymore. Everything I do feel like that, I feel for you. He stopped again, now standing in front of her. And even so, what you're proposing isn't simple. Me, being the emotional and romantic center of 2 women so spectacular. It sounded like every man's dream, but he knew himself. I'm emotionally lazy, Wednesday. You know that, I know that. I should be trying way harder if I were with 2 girls. I struggle to open up, to explain what I feel, to stay present. Being the kind of person who balances it all would be really hard for me. He paused. With you, it doesn't feel like work, because I love you, because everything else disappears when you're around. But that doesn't mean I can give the same to 2 people. Wednesday stepped closer with slow but determined steps. She placed her hands on his, firm but not aggressive, and looked him straight in the eyes. You don't have to carry all of that alone, she said, her voice calm and steady. Neither Enid nor I are asking you to be the perfect balance between us. You're not alone in this. I'm going to do my part. And so will she. It doesn't all fall on you. This is a relationship of 3. Luke looked at her closely, as if trying to read between the lines, searching for any contradiction. And what if it doesn't work? He finally asked. What if all of this ends up breaking what we have? Wednesday didn't look away for even a second. If it doesn't work, she said calmly, we tried. Then she added, with that icy coldness that masked her tenderness. But I'm not leaving you, Luke, ever. The only way you're getting rid of me is if I die. Luke looked at her with a mix of exasperation, tenderness, and deep love. And that's never going to happen as long as I'm alive. Luke murmured, lowering his gaze for a moment. Wednesday remained unshaken, though a subtle spark lit up in her eyes at Luke's words. "Whoa," she murmured in her usual frosty tone, but with a barely perceptible inflection that, for her, was the equivalent of a smile. "I feel safe now. Looks like I've got a personal bodyguard for life." Luke smiled faintly, already used to those biting remarks she used to hide affection. He didn't say anything, but inside, her words echoed strongly. "For life." "Give me 5 minutes to think," said Luke, sitting on Wednesday's bed and closing his eyes. She watched him. Luke began to think, first about Enid, his ex-girlfriend, his first real connection in Nevermore and in this world. He didn't think about the fact that she had marked him as her mate. He wasn't in love with her anymore, not with that wild intensity he had once felt. But he still felt something, a kind of affection that was hard to categorize, a lingering tenderness. He knew that if she were about to be hurt and he could stop it, he would. It had hurt him to see her injured just a few hours ago. Besides, he owed her for breaking his promise. And when he died for a few seconds fighting Elliot, it wasn't just Wednesday who came to his mind. Enid did too, her smile, her laugh, her warmth. Could he simply let her go? Would she survive that? Would he feel at peace if he didn't take Wednesday's suggestion when he had the chance? Then there was Wednesday. Wednesday, who had never had a friend. She would lose the only person who had truly connected with her, besides him. Could he do that to her? Hurt the two people who loved him most? If he said yes, he could prevent all of that. And the Poes. He was the last living Poe. He needed to continue the bloodline. Edgar had always told him that if he had 2 wives, even better, more descendants, and he would have both of his loves with him. Besides, he had loved Enid once. If he loved her once, why couldn't he love her again? Luke opened his eyes. Wednesday was already closer. Her expression remained unreadable, but her posture was tense. Almost imperceptibly, but it was. "Well," she asked, not blinking. Luke took a deep breath. "I've made a decision," he said calmly. Wednesday didn't move, but lowered her head slightly, as if bracing herself for the worst. "I'm going to accept the polyamorous relationship," Luke said. There was a second of absolute silence. Wednesday didn't react. "But," he added, raising a firm finger, "not completely, not yet." Their eyes met. "I'm not in love with Enid right now. I was, yes, but that's gone." Wednesday didn't interrupt him. She listened closely. "If this is going to work, I can't just go back to Enid like nothing happened. We can't pretend we're still a couple. It wouldn't work, it would be weird and uncomfortable. I'd have to rediscover her, fall in love again, or not, but it would have to happen naturally." Wednesday nodded slowly. "I understand," she said quietly. "It would be artificial to force everything at once." Luke watched her carefully. "And if it doesn't work with her," he added, "if I don't feel what I felt before, will you be okay with that?" Wednesday looked at him intently. "Yes," she replied, "because this proposal is a solution, not an obligation. But I want to try, because the idea of losing her also hurts me." "All right, then we'll try. Somehow," Luke said, with an expression that mixed acceptance, caution, and something harder to define. It wasn't exactly doubt. It was the awareness that he was stepping into unknown territory. Wednesday nodded, with that same sharp calm that defined her. "I knew this might be your decision," she said, "or at least one of the possibilities you were considering. That's why I've already thought about what comes next." Luke looked at her with a raised eyebrow, curious. "Since classes end tomorrow and we have to go home," Wednesday continued, "you and I will return to the Adams Manor. But the war isn't over, and Enid is still part of all this. So I propose she comes with us." Luke narrowed his eyes, processing. "That she lives with us at Adams Manor," Wednesday explained firmly. "That way you can spend time with her, share space, missions, battles, laugh, argue, talk, and maybe rediscover her. Besides," she added, with the sharp logic of someone who had already thought it all through, "we'll be able to fight together. The three of us against the Spellmans and their allies. Being in danger together tends to strengthen bonds. Luke stared at her, incredulous. Whoa, he finally said. Sounds like you already had it all planned out. Wednesday tilted her head slightly, without losing that inscrutable expression that sometimes bordered on intimidating. Planned? No, anticipated. I always have a plan for every possible outcome. Luke let out a half-smile, resigned. So what's next, General Adams? Do we break the news together? Yes, she's probably waiting anxiously right now, Wednesday nodded. Even though it was the middle of the night, and Enid had gone to Yoko's room so they could have this conversation in private, she was probably wide awake and unable to sleep. After saying that, Wednesday pulled out her phone, courtesy of Luke, who had introduced her to modern technology some time ago, and sent Enid a message. A few seconds later, she locked the phone. She's on her way. Did you tell her I agreed under that condition? Luke asked. Yes, better that she reflects on her happiness before walking in, said Wednesday with a small nod. You know how she gets when she smiles too much. She looks like she's about to explode into hearts and glitter. Luke let out a low huff, a mix of resignation and fatigue. This is going to be weird, uncomfortable at the very least, he murmured. It's been a long time since I've talked to Enid. Last time was in Sunnyvale, and it was brief. We were in the middle of a battle, and then I sent her with you to help you. Wednesday didn't deny or correct anything. It'll be uncomfortable for you, she said with her usual calm, almost clinical. Not for us. Luke raised an eyebrow at her. Enid and I already talked about it, Wednesday continued. We're friends. We understand each other. We discussed everything before bringing it to you. There's no tension between us, only clarity. Of course, she added, as if analyzing a natural phenomenon, that doesn't mean she's not nervous. She's probably packing in the hallway like a werewolf high on anxiety and bottled-up happiness. She's going to see you after so long. She's going to talk to you. And she's got one clear mission, to make you fall for her again. Luke crossed his arms, his eyebrow raising even higher. Perfect, he said with sarcasm. I'll be the damsel who must be wooed. All I'm missing is a long dress and a tall balcony. You've got the balcony. You're just missing the dress. Want me to lend you one? Wednesday asked, a teasing spark in her eyes. Now you're making my kind of jokes, Luke thought, saying nothing as he crossed his arms again, waiting for Enid to arrive. A few seconds passed, then they heard soft, quick steps in the stone hallway. A restrained rhythm, like someone trying to walk with dignity while screaming inside. Luke swallowed hard. Wednesday turned her head slightly toward the door. There were 2 soft knocks. Wednesday rolled her eyes. Come in. It's your room too, she said, raising her voice. The doorknob turned, and the door opened. The doorknob turned smoothly, and the door opened to reveal Enid. She was wearing her usual colorful pajamas, comfortable, with small, cute drawings. Her blonde hair with pink streaks fell just to her shoulders. She hadn't been running, but it looked like she had. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her eyes moved quickly between Luke and Wednesday. Hey, Wens, Enid greeted naturally, letting the nickname slip as if it were a secret between best friends. Wednesday didn't correct her. Hi, Wednesday replied in her usual monotone, though her expression, by her standards, was the closest thing to a warm welcome. Then Enid looked at Luke. Her eyes softened. There was something expectant, vulnerable, and at the same time hopeful in her expression. Hi, Luke, Enid said more quietly, with a touch of shyness. Her smile tried to stay contained, but it trembled slightly at the edges. Luke looked at her silently for a few seconds, feeling, for the first time in a long while, strange. Still, he forced a small smirk that passed for a smile and nodded. Hi, Enid. Wednesday, who was still sitting next to him on the bed, stood up with her usual mechanical calm. She took a wheeled chair from against the wall, dragged it to the bed, and turned it toward Enid. Sit, she said plainly, as if assigning seats for an interrogation. Enid obeyed without a word. She sat down carefully, smoothing out the fabric of her pajama pants, settling in. Her eyes shifted from Luke to the floor, and her fingers fidgeted nervously in her lap. Wednesday returned to her spot on the bed, sitting with a straight back and hands on her legs. Then she spoke. "Tomorrow classes end. We're going to Adam's Manor," she said with absolute precision. "The war against the Spellmans will continue regardless of school being over. You, Enid, will come with us." Luke said nothing. Wednesday had told him that minutes ago. Enid nodded, seeming fine with it. Wednesday continued, unfazed. "You two will spend time together again. The three of us will go on missions together." Forced cohabitation in wartime conditions. Ideal setting for a progressive emotional rediscovery process. Luke gave her a strange look. "You talk like we're signing a contract. No subtlety, huh?" he muttered. "I'm direct. It's better to make everything clear to avoid misunderstandings," Wednesday said, looking at Luke. Enid nodded, still a bit shy, but her voice was firm. "I'll go with you. I'll spend the holidays at Adam's Manor and keep helping with the war. We're at a critical point. I can't stay out of this." Then she looked at Luke and added, "And if there's a chance that I can reconnect with you, I want to try. Whatever happens, whatever you feel, I won't force it. I just want to be there." Luke watched her, still processing the absurd and strange turn his summer was taking. And yet, he didn't feel rejection. He had accepted not only out of concern that Wednesday might lose a friend, but because he realized he still felt something for Enid. What he felt was discomfort from how weird the situation was. "That sounds fine," Luke finally said, nodding. Enid lifted her gaze, her eyes shimmering slightly. But then she looked down and played with her fingers. "I just don't want you to have said yes out of pity for me, or sympathy for Wednesday," she murmured. It was something she couldn't bear, knowing that Luke had only agreed because he felt guilty, because he didn't want to hurt anyone. Luke frowned slightly and shook his head. "It's not just that," he said sincerely. "Yes, I do care about how you both feel, and of course that matters." He paused, then added in a calmer tone, "But I wouldn't have agreed if I didn't feel like there was still something. If I didn't believe there's a real chance it could work, that I could fall in love with you again." Enid held her breath for a moment. Luke looked at her more firmly. "You know me. You know I wouldn't agree to something like this if I didn't feel anything. When I had to choose between you and Wednesday a few years ago, it was hard, because I was in love with both of you." There was no drama or nostalgia in his voice, just truth. "Today, I'm in love with Wednesday, but that doesn't erase what I felt for you. And if I felt it once, I believe it's possible to feel it again with everything that's happening now." Enid nodded silently, with a smile that no longer trembled. There was hope, and most importantly, she no longer felt that fear that he'd only done this out of pity. "A good start," thought Wednesday, watching closely. She was calm, satisfied, no jealousy, no discomfort. She didn't feel any of that when it came to Enid. She had understood it long ago. Her love for Luke was strong enough to handle this kind of strangeness, and her bond with Enid was real enough not to waver. "It's almost 5 in the morning," said Wednesday after checking her wristwatch. Her voice was still as serene as always. "We should sleep. Tomorrow we return to Adam's Manor, and with everything we achieved tonight, things are going to move quickly." 2 ancient demonic elders killed. Margaret Spellman, a Dualora user, eliminated, and the Spellman twins captured. It was, without a doubt, the biggest victory in months. Wednesday turned toward them. "Talk for 5 or 10 more minutes if you want, then get some rest. We have a long day ahead." Enid nodded resolutely, clearly excited at the idea of finally having a conversation with Luke that didn't take place in the middle of a battle. But when she looked at him, her lips parted and she didn't know what to say. The words tangled in her throat. She was too nervous. Luke noticed her tension and decided to break the ice. "The last time we really talked was in Sunnyvale, when we fought together against that vampire. What was his name? The leader of the secondary branch of that clan." "Niklaus," Enid replied immediately and nodded. "We had really good synergy. I never got to say it, but it was amazing fighting with you. Everything just flowed so easily." Luke gave her a small smile. Well, thank you for coming to help. I never thanked you for that, for taking the risk, and for helping Wednesday. Wednesday herself had told him, if she had faced Gabriel alone, it would have meant her death. Thanks to Enid, she had held on, and together they killed him. Enid shook her head gently. You don't have to thank me. I wanted to be there. Then her voice dropped a bit. But I do want to apologize for stopping you when you were going to kill those vampire normie hybrids. Luke remembered the hybrids. One of them had been a classmate back at Shadowside when he attended that normie school like Tuesday. He had been about to kill them, and Enid had stopped him. He had decided to spare them. In fact, Wednesday interjected calmly, lying on her side on the bed, those hybrids were victims, tools. Niklaus and the pureblood vampires controlled them, and if they didn't obey, they would have killed them and their normie parents. They weren't true enemies. Luke nodded. Yeah, killing them would have been a mistake, he said, looking down at his hands. Even though those two hybrids had fought for the opposing side, they hadn't done so out of conviction, much less out of a desire to kill. They hadn't even attacked him seriously. They lacked both the power and the intent. Niklaus, on the other hand, had been a different case. That had been a fight to the death from the very beginning. Both sides wanted to kill. That's why he and Enid had killed him. But those two guys hadn't deserved to die. And if he had killed them without hesitation, it would have been a mistake. He didn't want to become some psychopathic killer who snapped the neck of the first person who attacked him just because he was stronger and could do it in seconds. Luke slowly lifted his gaze toward Enid. Thanks, he said sincerely, for stopping me that time. Enid's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the gratitude. Really? Yes, if I had killed them, I wouldn't have felt right about it. Not in the long run, Luke said seriously. Wednesday nodded from where she lay, with her usual stoic calm. She and Luke were used to cold decisions, to cutting down deadly enemies without regret. But even they had to know the difference. An enemy with no intent to kill wasn't the same as a ruthless murderer. Enid, for her part, relaxed a bit more, offering a faint smile. A brief but not uncomfortable silence settled in. Luke stood up, stretching his arms as if releasing tension. Well, that's everything, I guess. Tomorrow we keep talking and try to make this work while fighting a war against outcasts and demons, he muttered with irony. Wednesday and Enid nodded. Before turning toward the door, Luke looked back at Enid. Something crossed his mind, and he didn't hold it back. Did you cut your hair? He asked suddenly, tilting his head. In Sunnyvale it was longer, wasn't it? Enid instinctively brought her fingers to her hair, touching the ends that now barely brushed her shoulders. Yeah, I cut it about a month ago, she replied, a bit surprised but watching him closely. It looks really pretty, Luke said, without thinking too much about it. He was direct, clear, honest. The reaction was immediate. Enid lowered her head, biting her lip. A faint blush rose to her cheeks, while a shy but genuine smile formed on her face. Thanks, Enid whispered, not lifting her gaze, though there was a warmth in her voice she hadn't shown to any guy since she and Luke had split. Luke turned his eyes toward Wednesday. At first he noticed nothing, but then he saw it. A tiny twitch in Wednesday's left eye, a slight clench of her fingers against the blanket. She looked at him firmly, not cold, not upset, just registering. Was that on purpose? Wednesday asked suddenly, her voice slipping into Luke's mind through their telepathic link. What? Luke replied, feigning innocence. The compliment to Enid. You said you felt weird, that she'd have to win you back, and now you're complimenting her like you're flirting. Well, first off, it was sincere. She looks good. And she was my first girlfriend, of course I think she's cute. Luke paused as he crossed toward the door. And second, I wanted to see if you'd react. You seemed way too calm about this whole thing, one. Wednesday didn't reply right away, but Luke could feel the charged silence, like she was weighing whether it was worth responding at all. You're an idiot, Wednesday finally said. Luke already had his hand on the doorknob, but before turning it, he answered with that mentally cocky tone of his. Thanks, But if she does manage to reconnect with me, you'll have to get used to me saying things like that. So better start from minute one." "Is that a warning or a provocation?" Wednesday asked with glacial calm. "Just a reminder," Luke said casually. "If this actually works, you're going to see Enid kissing my lips and more. I assume you've already imagined that." "Of course, I've thought about it. And I've processed it," Wednesday replied without hesitation. "I was just mildly surprised at how fast you did it, considering you looked like a trapped deer 15 minutes ago." Luke didn't answer. An ironic smile was starting to form on his face, one that had barely taken shape when he heard his name, this time aloud. "Luke," Wednesday called. He turned slowly, one eyebrow already raised, anticipating the blow. "Aren't you going to say goodbye with a kiss?" Wednesday asked, her voice soft, clear, laced with elegant venom. Her dark eyes were locked onto his. The silence in the room thickened for a moment. Luke didn't move. Wednesday crossed her arms, firm. "It's something we'll have to get used to," Wednesday continued, as if giving a lecture on emotional philosophy. "Enid and you're my boyfriend now, officially. Enid still has to win you back, right? So there's no reason to stop showing me affection just because she's present." Enid, far from tense, nodded calmly. "I don't mind," she said, still smiling from Luke's earlier compliment. "I've seen you two together before, and now, well, with all this, it doesn't feel awkward anymore." Luke sighed inwardly. This was Wednesday's revenge, her little way of making him pay for the provoking comment a minute ago. But he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. "Well, if it's part of the new normal," Luke said, shrugging as he began to walk toward Wednesday. He approached her calmly, unhurried. Wednesday remained seated on the bed, unbothered, waiting for him like an empress confident in her power. Luke leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't too short or too long, just enough to make it clear he had no issue doing it in front of Enid. When they parted, Wednesday gave a sideways smile, satisfied, and Enid still wore a calm expression, showing no trace of discomfort. "We'll see each other tomorrow," Luke said as he said his goodbyes and walked out of the room. Sunday, June 5th, 2023. About 5 days had passed since classes at Nevermore had ended. Luke, who had paid Wednesday a surprise visit before the school year closed, accompanied by Naira, had never imagined that the real explosive twist of that night wouldn't be a rescue mission facing demonic elder spellmans, but rather his gothic girlfriend's unexpected proposal. To start a polyamorous relationship that included his ex-girlfriend, Enid. Yes, that had definitely been more shocking than seeing Margaret Spellman burst into flames and implode, while Luke hurled her skyward at sonic speed. When they returned to Adams Manor, Enid didn't come with them right away. She had to go back home to gather more of her things, clothes, books, and most importantly, to speak with her family. Even though she was already 16 and, as an outcast, had legal independence to make her own decisions, Luke knew talking to her mother, Esther Sinclair, wouldn't be easy. He remembered her well from when he used to date Enid. Strict, critical, with a gaze that analyzed him like he was always just one step away from hurting her daughter. The idea of having her as a future mother-in-law again was weird. Possible, but weird. Still, Enid didn't take long. One day after classes ended, she showed up at the manor with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and a determined smile. They had been living together for 4 days since. It was a strange arrangement in the vast Adams mansion. Luke, Wednesday, Enid, Natasha, Pugsley, Lurch, Morticia, Fester, Gomez, Eudora Adams, Thing, and the wild little Naira. Enid took one of the many guest rooms and quickly transformed it to her liking. The gloomy, gothic air of the manor was invaded by pastel colors, soft lighting, and pillows shaped like cute animals. She'd put stickers on the mirrors, a lavender diffuser, and stuffed animals on the bed, creating a bubble of warmth and sweetness in the middle of that elegant nightmare of a Victorian castle. Luke, for his part, had had his own room for a long time. There he kept his high-end computer, his TV, his space. Same with Wednesday. Although she slept most nights with him, she never gave up her personal room. Both of them valued their own spaces. They liked having individual sanctuaries, even if Luke's room had effectively become the shared master bedroom, since that was where they watched movies and did those kinds of things. It wasn't a 15th century dungeon like Wednesday's room. The 4 days living with Enid hadn't been exactly comfortable for Luke, but they hadn't been a disaster either. There was a constant strangeness, yes, a feeling of being in new territory. But Wednesday took charge of mediating, of keeping tension balanced, even acting strangely proactive. She had learned that if she wanted this to work, she'd have to build bridges. On one hand, Luke felt weird about the situation, and on the other, Enid was too nervous to naturally engage in conversations with him. Enid behaved in a way only someone who really knew Luke could. She didn't smother him. She didn't chase after him. She wasn't pushy or clingy. She was simply there, attentive, kind, warm at the right moments, and quiet in others. As if she understood that the process of falling in love again wasn't about seduction, but about resonating with his heart once more. For Luke, it was a strange feeling, as if he were now the prey, the object to be won over. He was used to protecting, leading, controlling, and in this new setup, at times, he felt like the damsel who needed to be pursued. An absurd thought, but a persistent one. He was a 4-aura user who had literally turned a critical situation on its head, saving Wednesday, Enid, and the others. His training had placed him among the elite of the outcast world. He knew that. In practice, only the demonic elders and Edward Spellman himself posed a real threat to him. The remaining members of the Spellman's second branch, their allies lurking in the shadows, they weren't opponents. At his current level, especially with Eclipse, Luke could take them out in seconds. Maybe a few might last a couple of minutes. That was it. That's why feeling vulnerable in an emotional situation threw him off. It felt almost ironic that, after surviving brutal fights and killing psychics with centuries of power, romance was what unsettled him. The idea of a girl trying to make him fall in love again. Looking at him not as something unbeatable, but as something precious. Of course, none of this was an ordinary teenage drama. This wasn't a normal summer. They weren't 16-year-olds planning trips and campouts. This was the prelude to war. They had captured the 2 Spellman twins and 3 hooded figures who had been operating as secret allies of the Spellmans. Every day, there were meetings at Adams Manor with Gomez, who held a high-ranking position on the Outcast Council, along with other council members like Octavius, the leader of the other Adams branch, and more. There were reports, maps, mission planning, and the interrogations and mental intrusions had begun, targeting the minds of the Spellman twins, Anna and Jane. Anna and Jane were the last living members of the Spellman main branch. The Spellmans had 2 main branches, but the most powerful one was the patriarchal line. Elliot, his brother Gabriel, their mother Margaret, a dual user, and so on. However, that patriarchal branch had been mostly wiped out by Luke, along with Wednesday, Fester, and others. According to the information they had, only 8 Spellmans from the other branch were still alive, including 2 teenagers Luke's age and 1 preteen around 11. The minds of Anna and Jane weren't easy to break into. They had advanced psychic defenses, likely implanted by demonic elders skilled in such arts to prevent their secrets from falling into enemy hands if captured. Fortunately, they didn't have the suicidal kind of defenses, those that kill the host from within the moment an intrusion is detected. Charles, Luke's telepathic mentor, led the mental intrusion team alongside other high-level psychics. In recent days, they had managed to extract important information. First, the exact number of remaining demonic elders. There were originally 11. 4 had already been eliminated: Mortimer, Aldrich, Vespera, and another, taken down by Gomez and Fester, leaving 7 still active, including Edward. Another key piece of information they managed to retrieve was the location of the secret base currently being used. They had an address, and although the Council's agents found it empty by the time they arrived, it provided a strong starting point to track them down. Beyond that, there wasn't much more critical intel they could extract. The identity of the Spellman's winged allies remained a mystery, even to Anna and Jane. All external collaborators operated under masks and false identities. The circle was airtight. Only Edward and perhaps one or two high-ranking leaders knew the truth. It was a logical strategy. If any of their spies within the council were exposed, the entire network would collapse. With that information exhausted, the twins had ceased to be useful. Their public execution was scheduled for 3 days from now at the council's central headquarters. It was a symbolic decision, a display of authority, a message: traitors will not be forgiven even if they carry noble blood. But it was also a provocation. The council wanted to see if the Spellmans would dare show up. If they would attempt to rescue the last 2 heirs of a nearly extinct branch. If they made that mistake, everything was in place. Defenses, traps, powerful weapons, and the council's strongest fighters, ready for battle. Luke, Wednesday, Enid, Gomez, and the others would also be there. And if Edward came, it would be time. The confrontation everyone knew was inevitable. Only 3 days remained before the war stopped being skirmishes and quick strikes, and became a full-on frontal battle, the most destructive one yet. That is, if the Spellmans chose to attempt a rescue mission. As for Luke, he thought it was a good idea, and if the Spellmans somehow succeeded, Anna and Jane didn't seem like a serious threat to him. While he pondered these possibilities, a fist passed within inches of his face, brushing his cheek with a gust of dry wind. "Focus," growled a firm voice. Luke shook his head, snapping back to the present, and countered with a swift knee strike aimed straight at his opponent's abdomen. Natasha. She barely had time to transform her palm into a metallic, hardened surface, blocking the blow directly. The impact echoed with a dull, heavy thud. The force was such that it pushed her backward a few steps, leaving marks on the training floor. Natasha lowered her hand, letting it return to its normal form. She gave it a quick shake, wearing a half-smile. "Whoa, even distracted. You can fight me while holding back and using only your green aura," she said, part impressed, part proud. Luke breathed through his nose, his chest barely rising. They were in the underground training room at Adams Manor, completely soundproofed and reinforced. He had been training with Natasha for almost 2 hours, but not at full power. No, that would be pointless. The rules were clear. No white aura, no blue aura, no yellow aura. No clairvoyance, no mental powers, no commands, no telekinesis. Just his body, enhanced by the green aura, the source of his raw strength, speed, and pure reflexes. If he used his white aura, he could read Natasha's intentions in advance or see every move before it happened. If he used telekinesis, he could bring her down without even touching her. And if he used his mental powers, he could trap her in illusions, freeze her movements, or read her thoughts to know exactly where she would strike, ending the fight in seconds. But that wasn't the goal. He was training at the edge of his limits, with the sole purpose of strengthening his green aura. Pushing his body past muscular failure, forcing his cardiovascular system, sharpening his reflexes without relying on any of his other auras. Since he had awakened his green aura less than a year ago, it was the most underdeveloped of them all. His strength with the green aura now approached 6 tons, not bad, but far too little compared to enemies who could easily possess 20 tons of force or more. Of course, against lethal enemies, he wouldn't rely on the green aura alone. But if he could raise his base strength, then when enhanced with telekinesis or eclipse, he would be far more powerful. And truthfully, increasing the level of his telekinesis was much harder, which is why he was now focused on his green aura. For this kind of training, Natasha was an excellent sparring partner. Although most shapeshifters didn't specialize in brute strength, their gift being adaptability, not raw power, Natasha was an exception. Through ancient rituals, years of practice, and precise mastery of her ability, she had raised her base strength to over 5 tons. Her body could mutate between reinforced tissue, metal, and armored forms. She combined brutality and technique with decades of experience. So when she and Luke fought using only base strength, they were very evenly matched. Natasha had better martial arts technique, but with all the experience Luke had gained through his ferocious training with Gomez, Fester, and Stalin, his current combat skills were far from lacking. "What were you thinking about?" asked Natasha, cracking her neck with a small pop. "You were distracted. Your new polyamorous relationship." Luke grimaced at that last question. Of course Natasha knew about it. How was he supposed to explain that, out of nowhere, his ex-girlfriend had come to live here? Knowing Wednesday's personality and his own, there was no way he could lie to Natasha. Not that. The execution. Wondering if Edward will show up, if they'll try to rescue them or something, Luke replied, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. "And do you want him to show up?" Natasha asked, watching him seriously. Luke shrugged. "I wouldn't mind. I want this to be over." Natasha looked at him carefully. She knew what that meant. Luke wasn't speaking from ego or arrogance. He was speaking like someone tired of waiting, someone who just wanted the war to end already. You can still improve your green aura a lot, and when that happens, no one will be able to stop you, so it's better if the final battle doesn't happen yet. With just a few more months, you could boost your physical strength and regeneration so much more. "You need to be patient," Natasha said, circling around, ready for the next round. Luke nodded. "I know, let's go one more round," he said, flexing his fingers. "But this time, no sermons mid-fight." "Sermons?" Natasha replied, raising an eyebrow. "I took care of you for years. I've earned the right." The sparring match continued. After a few more minutes, the pace of Luke and Natasha's training began to slow down. They had been going for almost 3 hours. Natasha panted lightly. Despite her vast experience, her body didn't have the kind of regeneration or extended endurance granted by Luke's green aura. He could train for hours without losing his breath. She, though formidable, was more human in that regard. "That's it for me," Natasha declared, raising a hand. "You should keep going, push yourself to the limit, and feel the exhaustion." Luke nodded, not nearly as winded as she was. To truly push himself, he'd need to keep training, probably for another 2 hours. He took a few steps to the side and handed her a towel. "Thanks for the help." "Don't thank me. It helps me too, and I'm glad to be useful," Natasha said, taking the towel and beginning to wipe off her sweat. "Just say you're welcome like a normal person," Luke replied, tossing her a cold water bottle. Natasha caught the bottle with ease and gave a faint smile. "Fine, you're welcome. Now keep training and breaking your bones to get stronger," she said as she started walking toward the door. Less than 5 minutes after Natasha had left, the door opened again. "Am I interrupting something?" asked a teenage voice, subdued and with a peculiar cadence, as if unsure whether to speak or remain in the shadows. Luke turned his head as he dropped the towel onto the bench. It was Pugsley. Disheveled appearance, faint dark circles, and a neutral expression more fitting of a coroner than a teenager, there he was, Wednesday's younger brother. He had just finished his 9th grade at Nevermore, his first official year at an outcast academy. Luke knew, from Wednesday's words and a few stray conversations, that before attending Nevermore, Pugsley had been bullied at a normie school. The ironic part was that he had enough power to kill his entire class if he wanted to. But his withdrawn and reserved personality, combined with his Adams upbringing, more inclined to creative sadism than impulsive retaliation, meant he endured more than any average outcast would have. Overshadowed by Wednesday's dominant character and the more flamboyant members of his family, Pugsley had always preferred to stay on the sidelines. Still, he was no less of an Adams than the rest. His fascination with the macabre was evident on a daily basis. When Luke started dating Wednesday, Pugsley didn't approve. In his mental world, no one was worthy of his sister. He spent an entire summer plotting assassination attempts, ranging from various traps to a final attempt involving a military-grade sniper rifle. That's when Luke stopped tolerating his clumsy murder attempts and got fed up. He beat up the two cousins who helped Pugsley in that particular plot, and when he was about to break a few of Pugsley's bones, Wednesday intervened. She didn't stop him by force. She just asked him not to do it, but it was a request, not an order. If Luke had really wanted to go through with it, she wouldn't have fought him to protect her little brother. Luke, in one of his rare moments of mercy, chose to forgive Pugsley. That didn't mean he had forgotten. His vengeance was still on hold. From that moment on, their relationship changed. Pugsley stopped seeing him as a rival and began to respect him. He never said it out loud, but he admired Luke, the guy who killed the Spellman patriarch, who took down ancient Spellmans, who awakened 4 auras, and who was regarded by the Outcast Council as a major figure, not for his lineage or political influence, but for his raw power. "No, I was just training," Luke replied. "What do you want?" Pugsley lowered his head slightly, uncomfortable. Then he took a deep breath. "I want to train with you," he said. "They won't let me do anything in this war, not even one mission. At the Battle of the Marlowe Estate, when I arrived, there wasn't a single enemy still alive." Luke watched him in silence for a few seconds. "And it wouldn't have made a difference if you'd gotten there earlier. You would have just been a burden." The response was dry and direct. Pugsley frowned slightly, wounded in his pride. "Even Naira went and fought. She goes on missions with Uncle. Why can't I? I have 2 auras," Pugsley replied, offended. Luke raised an eyebrow. "Naira," he repeated. "Even if she looks your age, or maybe even mentally younger, Naira has lived for over 50 years. She's a mythological creature, a noble-blooded Wendigo. Her base physical strength is 20 tons. Her reflexes are those of an elite beast. She has claws that cut through steel and regeneration comparable to that of werewolves," Luke continued, his tone firm. "You, even with 2 auras, are a burden in this kind of battle. If a low-level demon hits you in the chest, you'll end up in a body bag. Your mother knows this, and that's why she doesn't send you on these missions. The Morax are the most common and weakest of the demons in the demonic food chain. Even so, things shouldn't be confused. Being the most common and lowest rank doesn't mean they're weak. During the attack on Petropolis Manor, on Ajax's birthday, several Nevermore students, Luke's classmates, had a hard time dealing with them. Now, Eugene and others. There were deaths, and even the seasoned servants had difficult moments. In the past, seeing a Morak was rare. But now, with the Spellmans orchestrating the war from the shadows, these demons were like bloodhounds. They appeared in dozens, almost like war dogs, obeying the orders of their dark masters. For Luke, taking down dozens of Moraks is just a warm-up, thanks to his clairvoyance, the physical strength boosted by his green aura, his telekinesis, and of course, his soul weapon eclipse, which allows him to slice through demon flesh like it's hot butter. But not everyone was him. Before Pugsley could say anything else, Luke cut him off. "Despite controlling electricity and darkness, your speed is slow compared to a Morak, your reflexes worse, and your shadow shields are too fragile. Your mother knows that, and even if she worships death and all that, she's not an idiot. Same with your father. He loves danger, not suicide." Pugsley clenched his fists, holding back the mix of anger, shame, and frustration. He knew Luke was right. His black aura, though powerful, was still weak, and he used it more for hiding, ambushing, or disorienting, not for head-on combat. His electricity power was even more recent. He had only awakened it a few months ago. If he was lucky, he could maybe paralyze an opponent of his own power, but a Morak, a Spellman, or one of their battle-hardened allies, it would barely tickle them. Sure, he could fight kids his own age, but not the kinds of outcasts involved in battles like these. Luke sighed, crossing his arms. "But hey, it's not like you'll be a burden for the whole war. You can improve your power through training and pain. If I compare myself to you, back in 9th grade I wouldn't have been able to do much against Moraks or more experienced outcasts either." At the start of 9th grade, Luke only had 2 auras, yellow and blue. If he had faced a Morak that they possess a strength of around 8 tons and a body as hard as steel, his death would have been almost certain, unless he managed to kill it through mental powers, since their brain was their weak point. Pugsley looked up confused. Really? I need a training dummy. You need to get stronger so they'll let you join real battles. Everybody wins. Pugsley narrowed his eyes, suspicious. You're not gonna use me as a punching bag, are you? Of course not. I'm not your sister or your uncle, Luke said with a smirk. I'll only use my green aura. I've been training for hours nonstop, so I'm already tired. I promise you'll barely feel the impact. Exhausted psychopath, Pugsley muttered before stepping forward. Fine, just don't kill me, okay? Luke walked toward him and stopped just over a meter away. All right, let's start with the basics. What's your strongest front-facing defense? Pugsley didn't hesitate. A shadow shield. Wednesday taught me how to make one. It's the best I've got so far. Perfect, Luke nodded. Create it. You have 3 seconds. After that, I'm going to punch it. My current strength is around 6 tons. An average Morek has 8, so this'll help you see how far you are. Pugsley swallowed hard, raised both hands, and the darkness quickly condensed into an opaque shield in front of his body. Luke nodded. Exactly 3 seconds, and Luke struck. A clean punch, executed with perfect technique. The shield exploded with a dry snap, offering no resistance. The shadow dissolved like smoke torn apart by a storm. Luke's fist stopped just inches from Pugsley's stomach, leaving him frozen in place. Do you see now? A Morek won't give you 3 seconds to prepare, and it won't hit you head-on out of courtesy. It'll tear through you with its claws before you finish channeling your power, Luke said. Pugsley swallowed hard. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, pride wounded but understanding clear. Your shield is useful for fights against kids your age. It'll take a long time before it can withstand a real impact. If you want to survive before that happens, you'd better perfect another skill. Which one? Pugsley asked hopefully. Luke looked at him with something between patience and irritation. Don't your parents train you or what? He thought, though he didn't say it out loud. It seemed the Adams were more self-taught, with no strict training regime or step-by-step structure. Merge into your own shadow. Wednesday uses it all the time. Disappear before they hit you. Dodge instead of block. You'll need faster reflexes, better reaction time, and you'll have to master the technique until it becomes instinct. Do you even know the technique? He added. Yes, I was taught it, but I'm not very good, said Pugsley. And my reflexes aren't great either. I don't have clairvoyance like you. Stop complaining when we haven't even started training. Besides, you have electricity. Use it. Channel it into your nervous system like your uncle does. That way you can improve your speed and reflexes. Fine, I get it, Pugsley said, trying to sound more upbeat so as not to wear down the little patience Luke was offering him. Training began. For more than an hour, Luke pushed him, forced him to react, to try vanishing into his shadow, to use his electricity to dodge, even if only for a blink. Again and again, Pugsley failed. Sometimes he dodged in time, sometimes he didn't. His movements were decent but slow. He lacked instinct. He lacked confidence. And above all, real experience. Luke wasn't hitting with the full force of his green aura. He kept his strength in check to avoid breaking a bone. Even so, the physical punishment was evident. Pugsley ended up on the floor, panting, with a split lip and the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. He spat. His arms were numb, his ribs aching, and he was sure one of his shoulders would be sporting a rainbow-colored bruise by tomorrow. Luke approached silently. Pugsley barely looked up as he noticed the green aura beginning to radiate from Luke's palms. The energy was warm, vibrant. He touched his shoulder, his chest, his jaw. The pain subsided. Fibers repaired themselves. Skin began to close. "You're healing me?" Pugsley murmured, unable to hide his surprise. In his mind, Luke was the ruthless warrior, the living storm, the monster with 4 auras and his sister's boyfriend, who, if it hadn't been for her, would have left him in a wheelchair that summer. He didn't picture him like this, kneeling down, patiently healing him, at least not him. What he didn't know was that Luke wasn't doing it out of kindness. He was doing it to keep training his green aura, to drain his energy, to push closer to the limit. Once he finished, Luke stood up, stepped back a few paces, and crossed his arms, observing Pugsley with a neutral expression. The boy's body was healed, but his energy was still depleted. He was panting, muscles trembling, face pale. In the future, with an electricity aura and a darkness aura, your power won't be a joke, Luke finally said, his tone more relaxed. Actually, I'm a little jealous. Pugsley looked at him, barely lifting his head, incredulous. Seriously, you have 4 auras. Luke gave the faintest hint of a smile. Yeah, but still, yours is a really dangerous combination, especially if you manage to synchronize them. Darkness and electricity, speed and stealth. Precise strikes no one sees coming. You could become the perfect assassin. Except against you, since you can see the future, Pugsley replied, and Luke nodded smugly. Luke had many ways to dodge lethal attacks. He had defeated Elliot, who moved at ridiculous speeds, and that had been months ago. Now he was stronger, faster, everything had improved. He could even dodge Fester's attacks. You should join the Poe family, Luke said, as if tossing a stone into a lake to see how many times it would skip. You know, for the reconstruction. Pugsley's face tensed, his cheeks flushed. There was only one way to become part of the Poe family without being adopted, and that was by marrying Tuesday Poe. Luke said nothing more. He just watched him with one eyebrow raised and a smirk hidden behind his calm expression. Pugsley still believed Tuesday was a real person. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know that Tuesday Poe was actually Luke himself, under the effects of a gender-swapping potion. The first time Luke used that potion, several months ago, Pugsley had run into him by accident while wandering through the Adams mansion. And his reaction had been immediate. He was entranced. Tuesday, or rather the female version of Luke, had a flawless face, a distant princess-like aura, pale porcelain-like skin, and icy eyes framed by a proud, scowling expression. For Pugsley, it had been love at first sight, or something very close to it. And Luke, seeing the opportunity, improvised. He made up a backstory in seconds. That Tuesday was his sister, all for one purpose: revenge. Revenge for Pugsley's assassination attempts during that first summer. Since he couldn't give him a physical lesson, he came up with something better, a psychological punishment, something that would scar him from the inside. Since then, after Sunnyvale, every appearance of Tuesday had been perfectly calculated. Never too often, just enough to keep the fire alive. And for some reason, no Adams ever spilled the truth. Not Morticia, not Gomez, not Fester, and certainly not Wednesday. They all respected Luke's vendetta. In fact, they seemed to enjoy it. A well-woven lesson, an elegant revenge. Any news on Tuesday? Pugsley finally asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice trembled a little. Luke nodded slowly. Yeah, she should be back today. Pugsley's eyes lit up. Really? Wait here, I'll be right back. Luke vanished in the blink of an eye with Shambles. The air distorted with a hollow, dry sound, leaving behind a small object in his place, a pin. Since when Luke teleports outside his line of sight, he can't see the air particles to switch with. Pugsley stood still, nervous, adjusting his clothes, fixing his hair. He looked at the door, then up at the ceiling, as if trying to appear casual. He didn't quite understand how Luke was going to bring Tuesday, but he waited. A few minutes later, the space shimmered again. A soft burst of energy, and suddenly another person appeared. A young female figure, long blonde hair falling in soft waves, pale skin like marble, eyes blue as ice, perfect, ethereal features. It was Tuesday, but something was wrong. It took Pugsley a few seconds to realize it. At first, his heart jumped, his chest filled with warmth. But then, the details started to hit him like cold drops. Tuesday had appeared using Luke's technique, Shambles. A technique that, as far as he knew, only Luke could use. Well, they're siblings, he told himself. Maybe both of them can use it, or maybe Luke just sent her here with his technique so she didn't have to walk. But then he noticed the clothes. Exactly the same ones Luke had been wearing just minutes ago, a loose black t-shirt. The pants were also oversized, hanging slightly off her narrow hips. No feminine fit, no personal touch. It was as if someone else had worn them first, as if Tuesday had inherited them on the spot, or rather, never changed them. Tuesday stared at him in silence, a slight smile, eyes half-lidded, motionless. Pugsley swallowed hard. His heart was beating slower now. "Tuesday," he whispered, a gut feeling scratching at his insides. "Is that you?" "Who am I?" Luke asked, tilting his head slightly. Pugsley took a step back, his mouth parted, lower lip trembling. He raised a hand awkwardly, as if pointing might keep the truth at bay. It can't be," he murmured, disbelief etched in his voice. Luke's smile widened slowly, turning sarcastic. "You seriously didn't figure it out?" he asked, almost disappointed. "Love really can make someone blind." Luke took a step forward with mocking elegance, arms still relaxed at his sides. "Did it never cross your mind that Tuesday Poe doesn't exist? That I'm the last living Poe, and everyone knows it. Literally everyone. I'd even say it's modern outcast history, you know." Pugsley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You should learn from your sister, how good she is at investigating, connecting dots, finding the truth. But you fall far behind in that regard." He placed a finger on his chest with feigned shyness. "Were you in love with me? Did you want to kiss me, maybe?" The smile twisted even more. "The same lips that kiss your sister every day. The same tongue that—" "Shut up!" Pugsley screamed, his voice cracking, eyes wide in shock. He stumbled back another step, as if the floor were burning. "Why did you do this?" he murmured, breathing hard, his face pale as a ghost. Luke watched him in silence for a second. The smile was gone, only a cold, hard stare remained. No trace of compassion. "Because this is my revenge," he said at last. "You spent an entire summer trying to kill me. Traps, improvised explosives, weapons. Every day was another attempt. Your cousins attacked me once and ended up in the hospital. But you walked away without a scratch." Luke stepped forward, his shadow stretching long and threatening. "You were spared because of your sister, and that left a thorn in my side. So I decided to return the favor with something a bit more permanent. Something that won't heal in a week, or with some potion from your grandmother like it's nothing." Luke leaned in slightly, his smile icy. "How does it feel? Is this better than your sister's tortures? Did I pass, or was I too soft?" "Shut up, you bastard!" Pugsley roared, his face red with rage, shame, and humiliation. His orange aura sparked. Electricity surged around his body, and with a roar he launched himself at Luke, his right fist crackling with lightning. He was fast, faster than he'd ever moved in his life. But it wasn't enough. Luke didn't even blink. He sidestepped with insulting elegance, barely twisting his body. The electricity in Pugsley's fist didn't even graze him. It was nullified by Luke's telekinesis. Luke looked at him with that same distant expression he wore when in his female form. Like Pugsley was a bug that had tried to bite her and failed. Pugsley was wide open. He knew it instantly. Before he could retreat, Luke had already struck. His fist slammed into Pugsley's stomach. The air burst out of his lungs. Saliva sprayed from his mouth like a foamy jet. The world blurred. And before he could collapse, a delicate hand, too feminine, too ironic, grabbed him by the hair. "You look disappointed, Pugsley. But you're young, you'll find love," Luke whispered cruelly. He threw him, with just one hand as if he weighed nothing. Pugsley rolled across the floor like a rag doll, landing on his back, gasping, covered in dust. But Luke wasn't done. He walked toward him with slow, steady steps, as if his revenge had no urgency. When he got close enough, he started kicking Pugsley. Not hard enough to break bones, not even to leave real injuries, just enough to bruise his pride, to make him feel small. Quick, dry kicks laced with contempt. "PFF, you stink, and you wanted to be part of my family. What a joke," he spat, disinterested. Another kick. "Now you know actions have consequences." Another. "Wasn't this what you liked? Wasn't this how Tuesday treated you? Cold and cruel. Didn't you melt every time she ignored or humiliated you? Weird fetish you've got." Pugsley didn't respond. His hands were trembling. His cheeks were flushed. He got up with difficulty, avoiding Luke's gaze. He staggered, breathing hard, and without saying a word began running toward the exit. Luke let him go, satisfied to have finally carried out his vendetta. Pugsley reached the door and stopped dead. There, arms crossed, stood Wednesday, quietly leaning against the frame as if she had been watching for a while. She said nothing, just looked at him with those eyes black as bottomless wells. Pugsley froze, panting, his heart still pounding with rage and humiliation. His eyes met hers. There was no compassion in Wednesday's gaze, not a hint of tenderness, only coldness, judgment, calm disdain. "You knew," Pugsley whispered, still shaking. Wednesday raised an eyebrow, as if the question itself were a personal insult. "Seriously," she said with a sigh heavy with disappointment. "Are you stupid or just incredibly naive?" Pugsley looked away. Everyone knew. Mom, Dad, Fester, Lurch, even Thing. "Literally Thing," said Wednesday, looking at him as if sharing genes with him were a curse. Silence thickened in the room. Wednesday leaned in slightly toward him, her voice lower, sharper. "You sow stupidity, you reap humiliation. You tried to kill your sister's boyfriend all summer long. Did you think Luke wouldn't get his revenge? First mistake. We always taught you that revenge is one of the most important things in our world. Second mistake. You tried to kill someone way stronger than you." Pugsley didn't answer. He just ran out of the room. Wednesday walked up to Luke until she was standing in front of him. "That was a great vendetta," she said simply. Luke smiled. "Thanks, I learned from the best." Wednesday tilted her head slightly, accepting the compliment with a look of calm pride. Then her gaze turned a little more intense. "Watching the whole thing unfold from the very first moment, when Pugsley saw you and had that lovesick idiot face, it was fascinating. Watching his expression slowly shift into disbelief and despair. It honestly turned me on," she murmured with a cold, almost sensual tone. Luke's eyes widened slightly. He stepped closer, ignited. "Then maybe we should." Wednesday raised a hand to stop him. Her face was calm but firm. "You're in your female form. Don't even think about touching me." Luke froze, frustrated, and huffed. "Damn potion. Just when you were getting so receptive." Wednesday turned slightly, not looking at him. "Control your libido, princess," she said dryly. Luke smirked faintly. "Well, since you don't want to touch me romantically, let's train." "Good," Wednesday nodded. That was what she had come for, aside from witnessing the vendetta. "Oh, I'll call Enid to train too," Luke added. Wednesday glanced at him sideways, inspecting his feminine expression with interest. "That's good," she said. "A very good sign." Luke raised an eyebrow. "What sign?" Wednesday narrowed her eyes, satisfied. "That you thought of including her on your own, without anyone reminding you. The plan is working, and we've only been living together for 4 days." Luke didn't deny it. He just let out a soft breath through his nose. "Maybe I also want her to see me like this. I want to see her reaction," Luke admitted. Wednesday watched him silently for a moment, "to see if she still loves you no matter the form." "Maybe I want to know if the mate bond is really that powerful, and let's be honest. My female form isn't that different from the male one. My features are still there, just softer, more refined, more magically irresistible." Wednesday rolled her eyes, but a faint curve formed on her lips. "And actually," Luke added with a mischievous smile, "if we ever had a daughter and she took after me, maybe she'd look like this." Wednesday looked at him, in complete silence. "Though I hope she doesn't inherit my sarcasm. That would make her a nightmare to raise," Luke added. Wednesday exhaled softly through her nose, her face as neutral as ever, but her eyes sparkled with something she couldn't fully hide. "I hope she doesn't inherit your ego, because then we really are doomed." "Oh, please, look who's talking about egos," Luke said, shaking his head, and with that they began a train. There was 1 day left, until the execution of Anna and Jane Spellman. It had been over a week since the school year at Nevermore had ended. As usual in recent months, Luke was training. Once again, his green aura. Only this time, he was sparring with Enid. Even in her human form, Enid was monstrously strong. Her base strength hovered around 13 tons, not counting her heightened senses and superior physical endurance. When she accessed a partial transformation, her strength shot up to 22 tons, and if she went all out, fully transforming into her werewolf form, she could reach nearly 30 tons of raw strength. Luke, on the other hand, still hadn't reached 10 tons in pure physical strength, even after months of training with his green aura. To level the playing field, he also relied on his white aura. Luke wasn't using his future vision to avoid Enid's attacks. He was training his intention detection technique. This technique allowed him to sense the internal impulse of another being to act in the immediate future. It was especially effective for detecting bloodlust or murderous intent, as those psychic impulses were intense, piercing, and nearly impossible to conceal for most. However, Enid didn't have a trace of hostility toward him. She adored him. She loved him. And even if she was fighting him, there wasn't a hint of murderous intent. But Luke had developed a more refined variant of the original use. Instead of relying solely on bloodlust, he had learned to read the micro-impulses of his opponent's actions, not dark intentions, but the psychic activation that precedes muscular movement. Something like a shadow in the mind that signals what's about to come. Every time Enid decided to throw a punch or move, her brain sent a signal, and Luke had sharpened his perception enough to read those impulses before the body even moved. Adding to that were his eyes, enhanced by clairvoyance. His eyes functioned like an advanced version of a hawk's, able to detect microexpressions, muscle tension beneath the skin, the slightest movement of the shoulders or hips. To anyone else, Enid moved like a fast beast. To Luke, it was like watching her in slow motion, not ultra-slow, since it's no joke to move with over 10 tons of force, but his eyes could track her movements and even analyze her expressions, gestures, and more. Every step, every wrist twist, every blink was data. And Luke processed all of it. Enid threw a punch at his torso, fast and precise. Luke had already moved when her elbow barely bent. He twisted his body smoothly, letting the blow pass by inches, and countered with a punch aimed at her shoulder. She blocked instantly, crossing her forearms in an X. The impact was sharp and clean. The force was enough to push her back a couple of steps in the dirt. Luke couldn't help but click his tongue in frustration. He could anticipate her movements with surgical precision, but he still couldn't surpass her in pure speed. His blows, though well-placed, couldn't break through her defense. Enid reacted on instinct. Her body was faster than his. He could speed up his punches using telekinesis, but that would be cheating. This sparring session was strictly physical, and he didn't want to hurt her. Luke changed strategies. If he couldn't win with his strength, he would use Enid's own momentum to defeat her. Then the moment came. Enid launched a direct punch at his face. Luke dodged it by mere millimeters, letting her arm pass over his shoulder and, in an instant, caught her extended wrist. He closed his fingers in a clean, precise grip before she could retract her arm after the failed strike. In the same motion, Luke pivoted on his axis, pulling Enid's weight forward and down. He took her to the ground with a classic wrestling technique, adjusting the angle to make sure she wouldn't get hurt. Enid hit the ground on her back with a dull thud, unable to do anything unless she activated her partial transformation, and that wasn't allowed. Before Enid could get up, Luke was already on top of her, knees on the ground, one open and steady hand pressed gently against her neck. He didn't squeeze, didn't apply force. Enid knew, at Luke's current physical strength, he could crush her trachea in a second from that position. "I win," said Luke softly, looking her straight in the eyes. His expression was calm, confident, dominant but not cruel. Enid blinked, still processing the takedown, the precision, the way he had immobilized her without violence. Her heart was beating faster now, but not out of fear. She smiled shyly. She didn't ask him to get off. She didn't push his hand away from her neck. On the contrary, the contact felt strange, intense, but also pleasant. That was flawless, Enid whispered. Elegant even. Thanks, Luke nodded. Enid took a deep breath and continued, her gaze locked on his. Only with your white and green aura, you beat someone with more than twice your physical strength. Luke tilted his head, as if thinking it over for a second. Yeah, but you're a werewolf. If you had used your partial transformation, I wouldn't have beaten you so easily. They both knew it was true. Luke's physical strength was still growing. He was still green in both senses of the word. A smile formed on Enid's lips, soft and sincere. She liked that he wasn't arrogant, that he acknowledged his limits without taking anything away from his victory. Still, Enid went on, if you added your telekinetic strength to boost your punches, move fast plus your physical power, you could beat me even in my transformed state. Just hand to hand. 1. Luke looked at her in silence, but the faint smile on his lips revealed something else. He liked the praise. And it showed. Enid hesitated for a second, as if she had said too much, but Luke simply removed his hand from her neck and stood up. He offered her a hand. Is this part of your reconquest strategy too? Luke asked with a teasing tone. Compliments, flattery, technically detailed admiration. Enid blushed immediately. Her cheeks turned red, and she shook her head quickly, more forcefully than necessary. No, I mean that wasn't my intention. Luke let out a light, genuine laugh. I'm joking, he said as Enid stood up, taking his hand. Though I have to admit, it's a good tactic. Wednesday gives out a compliment once every 1,000 years, he added. Enid laughed at the comment, a soft, warm laugh, with that unmistakable spark Luke had always found contagious. He looked at her a moment longer than he meant to, as if his memories were pulling him in without permission. That laugh, he had heard it many times before, during training, in class, when they spent time together in the dorms at Nevermore. Luke's chest rose with a deep breath. For a moment, his heart seemed to remember too. I missed this, Enid said once her laughter faded. Luke blinked, coming out of the trance. Missed what? Training with you, Enid replied without hesitation. Luke didn't respond right away. He simply lowered his gaze, thoughtful. The last time they had trained like this, aside from these past few days since Enid arrived at Adam's Manor and the whole polygamy situation began, had been before the blood moon at Nevermore. It had been over a year. Back then, Enid wasn't his girlfriend, but they had the promise. In the end, after that, Luke had chosen Wednesday. Not because he wanted to hurt Enid, but because that's what he felt in that moment. Luke sat on the ground, leaning his back against the wall. Enid joined him shortly after, sitting beside him without saying a word. For a few seconds, the silence was comfortable. Luke half closed his eyes, staring at the ceiling, his voice barely a whisper. It must have been hard for you. When he chose Wednesday, shortly after the blood moon, and Enid had called him a womanizer, slapped him, and left on the verge of tears, Luke tried to do what he thought was right. Forget about her, focus on Wednesday, get to know the Addams family better, and prepare for summer and the plans to come. And if his mind ever wandered back to Enid, he would repeat a truth to himself that felt logical, almost comforting. It was just a teenage relationship. The kind that come and go, unstable, temporary. Most of them are like that at that age, right? But he had never taken the mate thing into account. When he found out, he convinced himself that Enid would never have chosen him as her mate, that he couldn't have meant that much to her. Enid glanced at him sideways, without pretending. She knew exactly what he was talking about. Yes, she said, it was. Luke lowered his head for a moment. Now I understand what a mate means to you, that you marked me and still don't hate me. I could never hate you, Enid murmured, without looking at him, as if saying it to his face would leave her too vulnerable. Even though I tried at first. Luke looked at her. He couldn't change what had happened, and he didn't regret the decision he made back then. After the first breakup, forced by Enid's mother, they spent months apart, until the new school year began at Nevermore. Then came that promise. If she defeated the Hyde, Luke would have to tell her the truth. Enid had figured out that Luke's decision to end things wasn't made of his own free will, but under pressure from someone else. And if that was true, they had to fight to be together again. But after that promise, they never saw each other again. Technically, they remained broken up. And in that time, Luke's feelings for Wednesday had blossomed. A new love, not inferior in any way to what he had felt for Enid. With Enid, the feelings had gone dormant. With Wednesday, they were new and different. Darker, more intense, more like him, and besides, she was a psychic like him. They shared the same coldness toward their enemies, the same twisted mindset, and more. He chose Wednesday, and he didn't regret it. But that didn't make what he had felt for Enid any less real, nor did it diminish the bond that still existed between them. Luke leaned slightly, resting his shoulder against Enid's. "Let me make it up to you, even if just a little," he murmured. Enid didn't pull away. On the contrary, she smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. Then she reached for her pastel pink towel, the one with the little embroidered fox in the corner. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and, without a word, offered it to Luke. Luke took it. He used the opposite side to wipe off his sweat. The contrast with Wednesday's style didn't go unnoticed. If Wednesday ever used a towel, it would probably be black, plain, at most decorated with eerie, realistic skulls. The silence became comfortable, almost soothing. After a few minutes, they resumed training. Wednesday joined in, after wrapping up some matters. The day came to an end, and the next morning, they set out toward the Outcast Council to witness the execution of Anna and Jane Spellman. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.